Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the universe preparing us for who we're meant to become. The midday sun, usually a benevolent golden eye over the sprawling rural market, had transformed into a searing, judgmental stare. A hush, thick and suffocating, had fallen over the bustling stalls, freezing every vendor, every farmer, every curious passerby in place. All eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction, were fixed on one man, Daniel Cross, the regional CEO. His usually immaculate suit, now slightly rumpled by the oppressive heat and his own mounting agitation, seemed to shrink around him, the fabric clinging to his suddenly clammy skin. His face, moments earlier a mask of contemptuous amusement, was slack with a dawning, soul-crushing dread, the carefully cultivated arrogance evaporating like morning mist. His head, thick with expensive gel, began its slow, agonizing descent, a movement that spoke of capitulation, of an irreversible fall, until his gaze was fixed on the worn leather of his polished shoes. A single bead of sweat, perhaps from the suffocating heat, or more likely from a deeper, internal torment, tracked a jagged path down his temple, a tiny, glistening testament to his unraveling. Moments earlier, he had been a titan, towering over a poor vendor, humiliating him with a casual cruelty that had become his signature. Now, before the very crowd he had sought to control with fear, he was bowing. The silence was absolute, heavier than any storm cloud, broken only by the frantic buzz of a fly near a forgotten melon, a trivial sound in the face of such utter, public annihilation. This was not respect. This was the collapse of a carefully constructed empire of ego, a profound and visceral surrender. Earlier that morning, the world had seemed far less dramatic, its edges softer, its threats more distant. Margaret Hale moved through the rural market like a shadow, a wisp of wind, almost entirely unobserved, her presence as ephemeral as a memory. Her practical cotton dress, dyed a muted sage green, blended seamlessly with the vibrant palette of fresh produce and the earthy tones of the market stalls, a deliberate act of camouflage. Her canvas espadrilles made no sound on the packed dirt pathways, her movements deliberate and unhurried, each step a testament to a quiet, profound intention. Her face, framed by soft, iron-gray hair pulled back in a simple, functional knot, held the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen much and understood more, a landscape of experience etched around her intelligent eyes. She offered a gentle smile to a woman meticulously arranging plump, sun-ripened tomatoes, a subtle crinkle at the corners of her eyes, a gesture of shared humanity. She paused by a stall piled high with artisanal cheeses, inhaling deeply the sharp, tangy scent of chèvre and aged cheddar, a faint, comforting memory of her own grandmother's farm kitchen stirring within her, a ghost of simpler times. She was an anomaly here, her true identity a carefully guarded secret. Not just because she was the chairwoman of one of the largest agricultural conglomerates in the nation, AgriCorp Holdings, and less publicly known, a federal rural oversight authority, but because of how utterly she committed to her disguise. There was no pretense, no air of superiority, no hint of the immense power she wielded. She was simply Margaret, a woman enjoying the heartbeat of rural commerce, allowing herself to become a raw nerve, absorbing the unspoken truths of this vibrant microcosm. She observed everything with the precision of a seasoned investigator and the empathy of a seasoned farmer. The subtle glances exchanged between vendors, laden with unspoken alliances and quiet rivalries, the hushed complaints about rising supply costs, murmurs that spoke of growing financial strain, the genuine camaraderie that blossomed even amidst the fierce competition for scarce dollars. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent despite their soft expression, registered the worn, calloused hands of a farmer polishing apples, each fruit a testament to tireless labor, the hesitant laughter of a young mother haggling over prices, a fragile joy amidst economic anxiety, the lingering scent of rich coffee mingling with the sweet, elusive perfume of wildflowers, a sensory tapestry of rural life. This was her ground zero, the bedrock of the vast, intricate system she oversaw. Real leadership, she believed, had to see the ground level, not just the gleaming towers of corporate power. It had to feel the dust on its skin, smell the soil under its fingernails, hear the quiet anxieties and the resilient hopes of the people who truly sustained the land. She believed in data, yes, in market analytics and profit margins, but she believed more profoundly in the undeniable, visceral truth found in the lived experiences of those who worked the earth, those whose lives were intimately intertwined with its cycles. Today, she was simply listening, allowing the market to speak its unfiltered truths. Her path soon led her to a modest stall, slightly tucked away from the main thoroughfare, yet consistently surrounded by a small cluster of loyal locals. It belonged to Tiberius Vance, an elderly man whose skin was as weathered as old leather, a living testament to countless harvests and sun-drenched days, his face etched with the silent stories of a lifetime spent coaxing life from the soil. His hands, gnarled and strong, spoke of a perpetual communion with the earth, each scar a memory of labor and dedication. He sold not just produce, humble potatoes, robust carrots and sweet onions, but also sturdy farming supplies. Thick ropes coiled with purpose, well-oiled tools gleaming with use, bags of potent organic fertilizer promising renewed vitality to tired soil. He was a pillar of this community, a quiet sage whose advice was as valued as his wares, his presence a comforting anchor in a world of flux. Margaret paused, drawn by the genuine warmth emanating from his stall, a rare commodity in the cutthroat world she often inhabited. She picked up a small, smooth river stone that Tiberius kept among his display, feeling its cool, grounding weight in her palm. It was an odd item to sell, a relic of the earth, but she understood its quiet symbolism, an enduring connection to the land, an offering of stability. She bought a small bag of heirloom purple potatoes, their skin a vibrant, almost regal hue, a testament to nature's artistry. "These look magnificent, Tiberius," Margaret said, her voice soft, carrying a genuine appreciation for his craft. Tiberius, his eyes a gentle blue framed by a lattice of crinkles, offered a small, knowing smile. "From the good earth, ma'am, takes care of you if you take care of it." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than customary, a flash of something unreadable, recognition, shared understanding, passing through his ancient eyes before returning to his waiting customers. Margaret felt a flicker of recognition in return, a sense of being seen beyond her simple clothes, a momentary connection that transcended the superficial. But she dismissed it, attributing it to Tiberius's inherent perceptiveness. He simply had that way about him. They exchanged a few more brief pleasantries about the unpredictable spring rains, the lifeblood of their shared world, and Margaret moved on, the small bag of potatoes warm in her hand, a feeling of contentment settling over her. She watched him work, his movements slow but deliberate, infused with the wisdom of years, his interactions with his customers marked by a deep, mutual respect and genuine connection. He knew their names, their families, their struggles, their hopes. He was more than a vendor. He was the market's steady pulse, its conscience. She understood now why he was so revered. He represented the quiet dignity of a life lived in harmony with the land, a stark, profound contrast to the predatory forces she knew often preyed upon such communities, forces that sought to disrupt this delicate balance. The tranquil rhythm of the market, though, was about to be violently interrupted. The air shifted, growing heavy not with humidity, but with an almost palpable tension, a foreboding presence that tightened the breath in every chest. A sleek black SUV, aggressively out of place among the dusty pickups and sedans, pulled up at the very edge of the market, its dark, tinted windows reflecting the bright sun like predatory eyes, gleaming with a cold, metallic hunger. Out of it stepped Daniel Cross, a man who seemed to exude an aura of polished disdain, his very presence a deliberate affront to the rustic authenticity of the setting. He was flanked by two burly men in matching dark suits, his personal enforcers, their hulking forms casting long, intimidating shadows. Cross himself was immaculate, his expensive tailored suit a sharp, jarring contrast to the earthy setting, a uniform of corporate power that seemed designed to alienate. His smile, when he wore one, rarely reached his eyes, which held a perpetual glint of calculation, a cold appraisal of profit and loss. He walked with a swagger, a predatory confidence, his eyes sweeping over the vendors as if assessing livestock or perhaps simply obstructions. The casual chatter of the market died down abruptly, replaced by a nervous, collective silence, a sudden vacuum of sound. People averted their gaze, suddenly engrossed in their produce, their hands trembling slightly as they feigned indifference, a collective act of self-preservation. Cross made a beeline for Tiberius's stall, his polished shoes crunching loudly on the gravel, each step an announcement of dominance. His men fanned out, their sheer physical presence intimidating, creating an unspoken cordon around the elderly vendor, isolating him. "Tiberius," Cross's voice boomed, amplified by the sudden quiet echoing with an artificial authority, "I trust you have my fee." His tone was laced with condescension, a cruel, cutting edge that scraped against the fragile peace of the market, shattering its harmony. Tiberius, though visibly stiffening, his spine rigid with a quiet defiance, met Cross's gaze. "Mr. Cross," he replied, his voice raspy but firm, resonating with an inherent integrity, "we agreed the last payment covered this quarter. There are no additional fees." Cross chuckled, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor, a cold, calculated expression of derision. "Agreed. Tiberius, my dear old man, you seem to forget who sets the terms here. Things have changed. New regulations, you see, market access fees, compliance costs, all quite legitimate." He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of absolute finality, "and all, I assure you, non-negotiable." He then proceeded to mock Tiberius with a theatrical flourish, picking up a handful of the vibrant purple potatoes Margaret had just admired, letting them fall back into the basket with a hollow thud. "These sad little specimens. You expect me to believe this is worth your prime spot. You're lucky we even allow you to sully our pristine market with your antiquities." His voice dripped with disdain, a venomous current. "Pay up or your little operation gets shut down, permanently. And not just here, old man. Think about your suppliers, your legacy." The threat hung in the air, heavy and inescapable, a suffocating blanket of dread. Tiberius's face, usually so composed, so stoic, paled slightly, a flicker of genuine fear passing through his ancient eyes, a vulnerability that tore at Margaret's heart. The crowd, though silent, seethed with a collective, impotent rage. Phones were subtly raised, capturing the confrontation, tiny digital witnesses, but no one dared speak, no one dared intervene. The weight of Cross's power, his corporate backing, his insidious influence over every aspect of their livelihoods, was too great, too overwhelming to challenge. Their silence was a testament to their fear, a silence that cut deeper than any noise. The injustice hung heavy, a bitter taste in the air. Margaret felt her own humiliation, a sharp, cold sting for not being able to protect this venerable man. It was then, from the periphery, that a calm voice cut through the tense silence, clear and steady, like a single, defiant note in a discordant symphony. "On what authority are you doing this?" Every head snapped towards Margaret Hale. She stood slightly behind Tiberius's stall, still unassuming in her simple dress, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her posture one of quiet observation. Her voice was not loud, not accusatory, but imbued with an undeniable quiet strength, a bedrock of authority that seemed to surprise even Cross. He turned, his eyes narrowing, his expression shifting from one of annoyed amusement to outright dismissive contempt. He took in her plain attire, her unassuming posture, her iron-gray hair, and a sneer curled his lip, a gesture of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "And who, pray tell, might asterisk you be, sweetheart?" he scoffed, his gaze raking over her in a deliberately dismissive manner, an attempt to diminish her. Another one of Tiberius's sentimental patrons, here to rescue the poor, downtrodden farmer. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the stalls, devoid of any genuine mirth. His men smirked, mirroring his contempt. "This is a private business matter, ma'am, not for nosy busybodies. Get back to your knitting, or whatever it is you do." He dismissed her with a flippant wave of his hand, turning his back as if she were already gone, rendered invisible by his will. "Another nobody," he muttered, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, a deliberate act of public shaming. The humiliation was clear, intended to cut deep, to put her firmly in her perceived place. The crowd watched, their silent discomfort now tinged with a new, collective embarrassment on her behalf. No one helped. No one spoke up for her. It was a familiar pattern in these small towns, where corporate power often stifled individual courage, where fear enforced a suffocating silence. Margaret's gaze, though, remained steady, unblinking, her eyes fixed on crosses retreating back. The public disrespect, though stinging, merely solidified her resolve, forging it into something cold and unyielding deep within her. The true magnitude of Cross's arrogance and the systemic fear he had instilled had been laid bare. Cross turned back to Margaret, his eyes alight with a cruel enjoyment of his own perceived dominance, his face a mask of self-satisfaction. "You know, it's cute. You think you can just waltz in here, little lady, and demand answers from me." He took a step closer, invading her personal space, his expensive cologne, cloying and artificial, assaulting her senses, a stark contrast to the natural sense of the market. "Let me tell you something about how the real world works, especially out here in the boondocks. People like you. You don't matter, your opinions, they're less than dust." He leaned in, his voice a low, venomous hiss intended only for her, a chilling whisper of power. "So do yourself a favor. Keep your pretty little mouth shut, and maybe, just maybe, you won't find yourself without a place to buy your precious organic potatoes next week." He straightened up, a smug smirk plastered across his face, a triumphant sneer, then turned to Tiberius, his voice regaining its booming, threatening quality. "Now, Tiberius, the fee, or the shutdown order is imminent." The insult, the condescension, the thinly veiled threat, it all hung in the air, thick and oppressive, a noxious cloud settling over the market. Margaret felt the eyes of the crowd on her, some pitying, some relieved it wasn't them, others simply resigned to the inevitable injustice. She saw a young woman quickly drop her phone, pretending to be examining a bundle of herbs, her courage failing her. She saw the despair in Tiberius's eyes, a quiet surrender, but Margaret said nothing more. Her face remained impassive, a mask of control, betraying none of the cold, hard anger that had begun to coalesce deep within her, a silent, furious storm brewing beneath the calm surface. She simply watched Cross, letting him dig his own grave with every arrogant word, every dismissive gesture. Her silence in that moment was not submission. It was a promise, a vow carved in stone. She was absorbing, calculating, every detail etched into her memory, every nuance of his hubris. There are truths that only reveal themselves when everything we know falls apart. The truth of Daniel Cross's character, the truth of the fear he inspired, the truth of the system he so casually exploited. It was all laid bare before her. This was the trigger. The humiliation was not just Tiberius's. It was the community's, and in a way it was hers too, for standing by as an ordinary citizen, and being dismissed, discounted, deemed insignificant. This dismissal was a profound challenge to her very understanding of leadership and justice, a challenge she would not leave unanswered. A silent resolve hardened within her, transforming the sting of insult into the fuel for an approaching storm. That night, the rural quiet around Margaret's rented cabin was deceptive, a fragile veneer over a seismic shift in motion. The only sounds were the insistent, rhythmic hum of the cicadas and the distant, mournful croaking of frogs, the ancient symphony of the countryside. Inside, though, the gears of a much larger, more powerful machine had begun to turn, quietly, inexorably. Margaret Hale was no longer the unassuming market shopper. She was the chairwoman, the the Federal Oversight Authority, a force of nature cloaked in meticulous process. The phone, a simple satellite model, glowed softly in the dim light of her study, an unassuming beacon connecting her to the vast apparatus of her power. Calls were made quiet, precise, devoid of emotion, each word a calibrated instruction. Not threats, never threats, only instructions delivered with an unyielding clarity. Her voice, calm and clear, carried the implicit weight of her office, the unyielding authority that lay beneath her quiet demeanor, a power honed by decades of ethical leadership. I need a full financial audit of Crosco Regional, specifically targeting market access fees and compliance costs implemented within the last 6 months. She instructed her chief of staff, Vance, no relation to Tiberius, but a woman with a shared surname and a formidable will, miles away in a brightly lit corporate office in the distant city. Cross-reference these fees against state and federal regulations. I want every invoice, every payment record, every contract, every single line item scrutinized, every shadow illuminated. Eleanor, a woman who understood the subtle power shifts in Margaret's voice better than anyone, responded with swift, almost telepathic efficiency. Consider it done, Chairwoman. I'll have a forensic team on it by morning, working through the night if necessary. Any specific areas of concern beyond the initial scope, every rural market operation under Daniel Cross's purview. Pay particular attention to smaller, independent vendors and legacy farmers. Margaret's voice was a steel thread, unwavering. Look for patterns of intimidation, sudden, unexplained fee increases, and any clauses that suggest monopolistic practices, predatory lending, or undue influence over local supply chains. I want to know who benefits and who suffers at every single point. Margaret's eyes, usually soft with observation, were now sharp, laser-focused on a stack of local market regulations she had pulled from her inconspicuous bag, meticulously cross-referencing them against federal statutes. Next, she reviewed documents, digital files sent securely to her encrypted tablet, a stream of data flowing into her command center. Permits, land deeds, local economic impact reports, meticulously compiled. She wasn't just investigating Cross. She was building a comprehensive understanding of the entire ecosystem he was exploiting, dissecting the parasitic network he had woven. She cross-referenced local newspaper archives, finding a disturbing number of small businesses that had mysteriously closed or voluntarily sold after disputes with Crosco, their failures echoing a pattern of coercion. She meticulously collected evidence. The subtle phone recordings from the market, sent to her by an anonymous but clearly outraged local, testimony from other vendors who had suffered similar abuses, quietly gathered by a network of local contacts she had cultivated over the years, a web of trust she had painstakingly built. This was her strength, not brute force, but relentless, meticulous process, an unyielding pursuit of truth. She spent hours poring over legal precedents, agricultural subsidies, and the intricate web of federal protections for independent farmers, understanding that the devil was always in the details, in the deliberate obfuscation of language. She understood that Cross's tactics, while seemingly small-scale at the market level, were systemic, a calculated assault on the very foundations of rural economies. They preyed on fear, on isolation, on the inherent lack of resources small farmers had to fight back against a corporate behemoth. Her work was about dismantling that system, not just punishing one man. There was no drama in her actions, no grand pronouncements, only process, only the steady, unyielding application of legitimate authority, quiet but devastating. She made a note to herself. Contact the Department of Justice regarding potential antitrust violations and racketeering. The cold logic of the law, applied with surgical precision, was a far more devastating weapon than any public confrontation. Her silence at the market was her strength. It allowed her to observe without revealing her hand, to gather the intelligence necessary for a targeted strike. Now, in the quiet of the night, that silence was being forged into an unstoppable force, a weapon of righteous justice. The stakes were not just a few dollars in illegal fees. They were the very soul of the rural community, the integrity of a system meant to support, not exploit, the land and its people. The intricate dance of truth and consequence had begun. In his penthouse apartment, miles away from the quiet efficiency of Margaret's night, Daniel Cross was basking in a self-made glow of untouchability, a golden aura of delusion. He poured himself another expensive single malt, the amber liquid glinting in the soft, recessed lighting of his sprawling living room, reflecting his perceived triumph. The market incident, a minor irritation, a fleeting disruption, was already fading into the background of his mind, a momentary fly he'd swatted with dismissive contempt. He chuckled to himself, recalling the terrified faces, the way that old fool Tiberius had almost crumpled, the pathetic deference of the crowd. And that woman, that little busybody in her drab dress, trying to play hero to stand against him. He'd put her in her place swiftly and decisively, a satisfying memory. These people, he muttered to the empty room, swirling the liquor in his glass, they just don't get it, do they? They think their quaint little lives, their dirt farms, their sad little stalls, matter to anyone beyond themselves. He took a long, satisfied sip, savoring the burn of the whiskey and the burn of his own superiority. They exist to be managed, to be optimized, for my asterisk benefit. His company, Crossgo, had been expanding rapidly, voraciously acquiring smaller distributors, consolidating market access, and in his view, bringing efficiency to a lagging sector. In reality, it was a ruthless campaign of monopolization, squeezing out competition, and imposing arbitrary fees that lined his pockets while slowly strangling the life out of independent farmers and vendors, a methodical process of economic subjugation. He believed himself untouchable, a financial titan impervious to lesser mortals. His legal team was robust, a phalanx of highly paid sharks, his political connections well-oiled, ensuring a smooth path through any regulatory tangles. His financial maneuvers labyrinthine enough to confound casual scrutiny, a masterpiece of corporate obfuscation. He had perfected the art of operating in the gray areas, of exploiting loopholes, of preying on the desperation of those with fewer resources, a true predator in the capitalist jungle. He envisioned a future where Crossgo controlled every aspect of the regional agricultural supply chain, from seed to shelf, a monolithic empire built on the backs of the powerless. He saw himself as a visionary, a titan of industry, not a petty extortionist. The idea that some anonymous market woman could pose a threat was laughable beneath his contempt. "They don't matter," he repeated, the words rolling off his tongue with a smooth, self-assured cadence, a dangerous mantra. Not one bit. He finished his drink, a smug smile on his face, oblivious to the silent, invisible storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that would soon engulf his carefully constructed world. Unbeknownst to him, this very arrogance was fueling a deeper anger, a slow-burning fury not just in the market, but across the digital landscape, spreading like a virulent strain of truth. The quiet recordings made by phones had not vanished into the ether. They had been uploaded, shared, dissected, amplified across social media, each view a fresh wave of outrage. The initial indignation over Tiberius's humiliation had quickly broadened, encompassing a wider frustration with corporate overreach, with big business crushing the little guy, a collective scream against injustice. The audience anger, a slow simmer yesterday, was now reaching a peak, a collective roar that Cross, insulated in his opulent penthouse, was utterly deaf to. He believed he was above it all, above the fray, but the ground beneath him was already crumbling, hollowed out by the very people he deemed irrelevant. His kingdom built on sand would soon be swept away. The first cracks in his carefully constructed illusion were forming, silent and insidious. The first obstacle Margaret encountered wasn't a direct confrontation, but a wall of bureaucratic inertia, a legal labyrinth designed to protect established interests. Crossgo's meticulously crafted corporate structure, a masterpiece of legal obfuscation, proved to be a formidable defense. Eleanor, Margaret's chief of staff, reported back with a clipped, frustrated tone. Chairwoman, Crossgo's legal team is exceptionally well briefed. They're delaying every request, citing proprietary information, trade secrets, you name it. They're burying us in paperwork designed to waste time and resources. It's a textbook stall tactic. Expected, Margaret replied, her voice calm, a low hum of determination beneath it. They're attempting to exhaust our resolve, to make us believe the cost of pursuit outweighs the potential gain. But this isn't about profit for us, Eleanor. It's about precedent. Find their vulnerabilities. Every major corporation has them, often in the subsidiaries, the smaller, less scrutinized entities. Margaret shifted her focus, diving deeper into Crossgo's web of regional acquisitions. She uncovered shell corporations, layers of partnerships designed to obscure ownership and liability. She found instances where Crossgo had bought out smaller, struggling distributors at ridiculously low prices, only to then impose crippling logistics fees on the very farmers who had previously relied on those distributors. It was a classic squeeze play. Control the distribution, then control the producers. The local newspaper archives she'd scoured provided anecdotal evidence, but concrete, legally actionable proof remained elusive, hidden beneath mountains of deliberately vague contracts. Witnesses, farmers who had initially expressed willingness to testify, suddenly became silent, their fear palpable even through indirect channels. Crossgo had eyes and ears everywhere, and its reach extended far beyond the market. Margaret understood this was crisis one. The system, built to protect, was instead shielding the predator. She needed a different approach, a way to cut through the legal noise and reach the core of the rot. The quiet hum of cicadas outside her cabin seemed to mock the legal battles within, a stark contrast between nature's honest cycles and man's dishonest machinations. The path forward wasn't just about law. It was about exposing the truth beneath the legalese, a truth the community knew in their bones but couldn't articulate in a courtroom. This was where the insidious power of Cross truly lay, in its ability to silence and intimidate. The whispers from the rural communities grew louder, reaching Margaret's ears through her network. Farmers were defaulting on loans, facing foreclosure, not because of crop failure, but because Crossgo was suddenly demanding exorbitant transportation surcharges, or refusing to purchase their produce at previously agreed-upon rates, citing spurious quality control issues. This was Crisis 2, a systemic assault designed to break the backbone of independent agriculture. Margaret felt the weight of it, the cold knot of responsibility tightening in her chest. She found herself reflecting more deeply on the path that had led her to this cabin, this solitary fight. Her father, Samuel Hale, the visionary founder of AgriCorp Holdings, had built the company on a bedrock of respect for the land and its cultivators. He was a man of the earth, a self-made titan who understood that true prosperity flowed from sustainable partnership, not predatory exploitation. She spent hours poring over his old journals, leather-bound tomes filled with his elegant, spidery script. The land provides, *1 entry read, but only if we honor its stewards. To break the farmer is to break the earth itself, and a broken earth yields nothing but dust. Another passage, filled with a righteous anger, recounted a similar struggle from decades past, a precursor to Crossgo's tactics. A rival corporation, driven by short-sighted greed, had tried to corner the regional grain market, squeezing small farmers until they faced ruin. Samuel, then a young, ambitious entrepreneur, had rallied the farmers, not with protests, but with an innovative, cooperative distribution model that bypassed the monopolistic bottleneck. He had fought not with lawsuits, but with a better, more ethical system. It was a turning point for AgriCorp, cementing its reputation as a champion of the rural community. This was the family legacy, the weight of a century of integrity that Margaret carried. The tiller's tax was a concept Samuel had often discussed in these journals, a mechanism to ensure that any future executive who dared to exploit AgriCorp's partners would unknowingly contribute to the very communities they sought to harm, a poetic justice embedded in the corporate DNA. He had believed in safeguards against future hubris, a quiet strength built into the very foundation of the company. It wasn't a specific clause revealed, but a philosophy, a principle Samuel had instilled. Margaret felt a renewed surge of purpose, a calm fire in her belly. The current bureaucratic stonewalling, the quiet intimidation Crosco wielded, it was a replay of history, a familiar battle. She needed to follow her father's spirit, not just to fight the symptoms, but to dismantle the structure to offer a viable, ethical alternative. The memory of Cross's sneer, his dismissive "nobody," replayed in her mind, a potent reminder of the personal stake. She was no longer just the chairwoman. She was the inheritor of a sacred trust, a guardian of a legacy. This was reflective pause too, a profound understanding that her fight was not just against one man, but for the very soul of American agriculture, a perpetual hook rooted in her family's struggle. The challenges were immense, the odds stacked, but the blueprint for ethical victory lay buried in her father's wisdom, waiting to be unearthed. The sheer weight of this responsibility could have crushed a lesser person, but for Margaret it clarified everything, sharpening her resolve. Aliner's forensic team had finally managed to pry loose some damning evidence from Crosco's labyrinthine accounts, aided by Margaret's detailed intel from the ground. They found a series of shell companies used to funnel market access fees into offshore accounts, bypassing tax regulations and corporate oversight. They uncovered predatory loan agreements disguised as partnership initiatives, designed to indebt farmers to Crosco and seize their land upon default. But the public proof, the undeniable, irrefutable evidence that would hold up in a court of public opinion, remained difficult to consolidate. Witnesses were still reluctant, terrified of Crosco's retribution. This presented Margaret with crisis too. The legal system, for all its power, was slow, cumbersome, and easily manipulated by well-funded adversaries. She couldn't wait months, perhaps years, for a judgment while farmers continued to suffer. The weight of human suffering was a tangible thing, pressing down on her. She felt the despair of Tiberius, magnified across a dozen other communities, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She needed an innovation, a turning point that would bypass Cross's legal shields and strike at the core of his power, his reputation and his public image. She retreated deeper into her thoughts, the rural quiet of her cabin a stark contrast to the buzzing mental activity. She reviewed her father's old journals again, not just for inspiration, but for a strategic roadmap. Samuel Hale had often spoken of the importance of moral capital, the trust and respect earned from the community, as the strongest currency. He believed that while laws could be bent, public truth, once unequivocally revealed, possessed an unstoppable force. His own successes hadn't just been legal victories. They were triumphs of public perception, of rallying support by exposing undeniable injustice. This was the turning point Margaret needed. Her innovation wouldn't be a new financial product, but a strategic deployment of transparency and public accountability, leveraged by her dual identities. She made a series of new, precise calls. Not to Aliner this time, but to a select few trusted contacts within federal media relations, regulatory bodies, and even agricultural advocacy groups. She instructed them to quietly compile public information regarding Crosco's aggressive expansion, the rising complaints from farmers, and the unusually high number of small farm foreclosures in regions where Crosco operated. No accusations were to be made, no names dropped, just data, public records, facts. She wanted to create a narrative of suspicion, to sow the seeds of doubt in the minds of the wider public, and more importantly, in the minds of Crosco's investors and board members, whose primary concern was optics and shareholder value. This was the subtle, strategic use of her position as a federal rural oversight authority, not to enforce, but to illuminate, to create an undeniable public pressure that Cross would be unable to legally sidestep. The whispers of the market, once dismissed, would become a roar amplified by the very systems he thought he controlled. She was turning his arrogance, his dismissal of public opinion, against him. This quiet strategy, born of a deep understanding of both corporate power and community resilience, was her true turning point, her unique innovation. The next day dawned with an unusual chill in the air, a premonition that hung heavy over the town, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure mirroring the approaching societal storm. The market, usually a hub of cheerful chaos, felt different, imbued with a strange, taut energy. A sense of anticipation, unspoken but palpable, crackled between the stalls, an electric current of collective expectation. Word had spread, carried on whispers and amplified by shared social media posts, now filled with the data points Margaret had subtly released. Something was happening. People gathered, not just to shop, but to witness, drawn by an irresistible magnetic force of collective destiny. The customary hustle was muted, replaced by a low hum of speculation, a nervous chatter that was more fervent than any prior silence. A black sedan, discreet but undeniably official, pulled up near the main square, followed by a second, then a third. Out of them stepped men and women in serious, understated suits, their faces unreadable, their movements precise and coordinated. They weren't local police. Their badges glinted with federal insignia, catching the sunlight, symbols of a higher authority. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind through dry leaves. Who are they? What's going on? The air grew thick with a mixture of fear and a fragile, burgeoning hope, two powerful emotions warring for dominance. Daniel Cross arrived shortly after, pulling up in his flashy SUV, oblivious to the shifting atmosphere, his usual swagger still intact, but perhaps a fraction less confident. He saw the federal agents, a frown creasing his brow. Audits, he thought, more bureaucratic nonsense. They always get involved eventually. Nothing I can't handle. He pushed through the gathering crowd, a forced smile on his face, annoyance bubbling beneath his calm exterior, utterly confident it would blow over as everything always did. He was a master of evasion, or so he believed. Then, from the modest crowd, Margaret Hale stepped forward, her movements deliberate, unhurried, yet imbued with an unmistakable gravitas. She was still dressed in her simple, unassuming clothes, the same sage green dress, the same canvas espadrilles, a deliberate choice, a visual metaphor for her unwavering connection to the land and its people. But something was profoundly different. Her posture was straighter, her shoulders back, her gaze direct and unyielding, fixed solely on Daniel Cross. The federal agents, who had been standing impassively, their forms like silent sentinels, turned to her, their expressions subtly changing from professional distance to one of deep, abiding respect, an acknowledgement of her true rank. One agent, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward and held out a file, its contents a harbinger of doom. Margaret accepted it, her movements fluid and purposeful, a conductor taking up her baton. She turned to face the stunned crowd. Her voice, though still calm, now carried a new resonance, a depth of authority that commanded instant, absolute silence, a silence so profound it seemed to absorb all other sound. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her gaze sweeping over the faces, acknowledging the fear, the hope, the lingering anger connecting with each individual soul. "My name is Margaret Hale." She paused, allowing the name to settle for its true weight to be felt. Then, with deliberate slowness, she opened the file the agent had handed her, a single, official-looking card revealed within. She held it up, displaying it briefly for the crowd to see, but primarily for the benefit of Daniel Cross, who had just pushed his way to the very front, a look of growing unease on his face. "And I am the chairwoman of the Federal Rural Oversight Authority, and the acting chairwoman of the AgriCorp Holdings conglomerate." A collective gasp ripped through the market, a visceral sound, a sudden, sharp intake of breath, a shock wave that reverberated through every person present, shaking them to their core. The silence that followed was even more profound than the one before, a silence heavy with revelation, with the stunning impact of a truth unveiled. Daniel Cross froze, his swagger evaporating, replaced by a ghastly stillness. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, ashen gray, as if all blood had fled his veins. His eyes, wide with sudden, sickening realization, darted wildly from Margaret's calm, unwavering gaze to the grim faces of the federal agents, then to the phone still recording, now openly held high, capturing his undoing for posterity. The woman he had publicly humiliated, dismissed as a nobody, threatened with impunity, scoffed at with such casual cruelty, she was her. The most powerful woman in American agriculture, the federal authority he had mocked. The truth crashed down on him, heavy and inescapable, shattering his carefully constructed world of arrogance and deceit into a million glittering fragments. The casual cruelty he had wielded just yesterday now returned to him, magnified 1,000-fold, a cosmic retribution. His own words, "These people don't matter," echoed in his mind, a monstrous prophecy of his own undoing, a haunting refrain that sealed his fate. The game was over. The blood drained from Daniel Cross's face, leaving him utterly pallid, his features contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, a primal fear stripping away all veneer of civility. The ground, which moments ago had felt solid and unyielding beneath his expensive shoes, now seemed to pitch and sway beneath him, threatening to swallow him whole. His entire body stiffened, a statue carved from disbelief and absolute horror, paralyzed by the enormity of his downfall. He looked at Margaret Hale, her quiet dignity now radiating an almost unbearable power, a force of nature in a sage-green dress, then at the assembled federal agents, their faces grim and unyielding, then back to the recording phones that would immortalize his downfall, his public annihilation, the illusion of his invincibility, the carefully cultivated arrogance, the bedrock of his entire existence, shattered around him like fragile glass, each shard reflecting his ruin. He felt the crushing weight of every lie he had told, every extortion he had engineered, every cruel word he had ever uttered, each sin accumulating into an unbearable burden. He saw his career, his carefully constructed reputation, his meticulously built empire, crumble into dust before his very eyes, reduced to nothingness by a quiet woman he had utterly underestimated. A silent command seemed to pass between Margaret and one of the agents, a subtle nod, a shared understanding. The agent stepped forward, holding out a document, a preliminary injunction, a freeze on assets, an announcement of a full federal investigation into Crossco Regional's practices, an avalanche of legal proceedings about to bury him. Cross stared at it, his eyes unfocused, glazed over with shock, unable to comprehend the damning words, the legal jargon that spelled his end. His mouth worked, but no sound came out, only a dry, rasping breath. The sheer scale of what he had done, and more importantly to whom, had finally registered, the full, terrifying implications washing over him. He had not merely offended a woman. He had provoked a federal entity, a corporate giant with an unwavering moral compass, and more importantly, a force that embodied the very justice he had so blithely ignored, so arrogantly denied. Then slowly, his shoulders began to slump, a visible surrender to an inevitable fate. His head, which had been held so high in disdain, in contempt, began its agonizing descent. It wasn't a bow of respect. It was an involuntary submission, a physiological reaction to the crushing weight of his inevitable collapse, a physical manifestation of his broken will. He lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the ground, unable to meet the eyes of Margaret Hale, unable to face the righteous anger of the crowd, unable to confront the stark, unforgiving reflection of his own ruin. A collective sigh, a deep, resonant release of pent-up tension, rippled through the market. A collective exhalation of fear and oppression finally lifted. The air itself seemed lighter. Margaret Hale watched him, her expression calm, devoid of triumph but utterly resolute, a quiet force of nature. She then turned her attention to Tiberius, who stood wide-eyed, his relief palpable, tears glistening in his ancient eyes. "Tiberius Vance," she said, her voice carrying across the silent market, clear and strong, "your stall is protected. Your rights as an independent vendor are reaffirmed, and any funds illegally collected from you and from others will be returned with interest. Every cent accounted for, every injustice rectified." She looked directly at the crowd, her gaze encompassing every face, every story. Full federal investigations into Crosco Regional and Daniel Cross's practices are commencing immediately. We will ensure accountability, transparency, and justice for all affected, for the integrity of this land and its people. A ripple of murmurs, then a quiet, spreading wave of applause began to build, hesitant at first, then growing in strength, until it was a resounding ovation, a cacophony of relief and vindication. The fear that had gripped the market for so long was finally breaking, shattering into 1,000 pieces under the weight of truth. Hope, fragile yet tenacious, began to blossom in its place. Margaret raised her hand, and the applause softened, a respectful silence falling once more. She looked out at the faces, from the youngest child clinging to a parent's hand to the oldest farmer, their eyes now alight with a renewed, vibrant hope. Her gaze returned to the bowed, broken figure of Daniel Cross, a monument to his own hubris, then swept across the vibrant, resilient market, its spirit rekindled. Her voice, clear and strong, resonated with the weight of her conviction, carrying not just a command, but a philosophy, a creed she had lived by her entire life, inherited from a long line of honorable stewards. "Respect the land," she said, her voice quiet but firm, imbued with the wisdom of generations, "and the people who live on it. For without them, none of us can truly thrive." The words hung in the air, a final, definitive statement on the true source of power and prosperity, a timeless truth. Cross remained bowed, a stark contrast to the renewed dignity that now filled the market, a silent testament to his utter defeat. The legacy of integrity, fought for by quiet observation and relentless process, had finally triumphed over the legacy of corporate greed, a victory not just for a market, but for a way of life. The earth itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, its cycles of growth and sustenance protected once more. The aftermath of Daniel Cross's public bowing was not merely a moment of fleeting spectacle. It was the seismic shift that irrevocably altered the landscape of regional agriculture. The market, once shrouded by a palpable fear, began to exhale, slowly, tentatively, and then with a burgeoning sense of liberation, a collective shedding of an oppressive weight. The news of Margaret Hale's true identity, and the swift, decisive action she initiated, spread like wildfire, carried by every recorded phone, every excited whisper, every shared triumph. It became a legend overnight, a modern parable for the quiet strength of true authority over the bluster of perceived power, a story whispered from farm to farm. Margaret did not linger, nor did she seek further accolades. Her purpose fulfilled, she faded back into her federal responsibilities, leaving behind a meticulous team of investigators to untangle the intricate web of Crosco's abuses. The initial injunction against Crosco Regional was swiftly followed by a comprehensive audit, exposing a staggering array of illegal fees, predatory contracts, and outright fraudulent practices that had bled the rural communities dry. Suppliers who had been forced into unfavorable terms were offered restitution and new, fair contracts, rebuilding their livelihoods. Farmers threatened with foreclosure due to fabricated debts found their burdens lifted, their generational land secured once more. Tiberius Vance, the quiet, dignified vendor, became a symbol of the market's resilience, his weathered face now alight with a quiet joy. His stall, once a target, now flourished, his produce and tools more sought after than ever, a beacon of authenticity. The community rallied around him, supporting him, celebrating him, not just for his survival, but for his inherent wisdom. He, too, refused to revel in Cross's downfall, instead focusing on rebuilding the trust that had been eroded by years of fear, a quiet act of grace that mirrored Margaret's own integrity. For Margaret, the incident was a stark reminder of why she continued to wear her plain clothes, why she insisted on seeing the ground level, on feeling the dust beneath her feet. The abstract numbers in corporate reports could never convey the true human cost of unchecked greed, the silent despair of families facing ruin. The cold fluorescence of a boardroom could never illuminate the quiet desperation of a farmer losing his livelihood, his legacy. Her work was a continuous vigil, a never-ending fight against the encroaching shadows of exploitation, a commitment etched into her very being. She knew that Daniel Cross was not an isolated incident. He was a symptom of a larger, systemic problem that required constant vigilance and proactive intervention, a perpetual struggle against the forces that sought to commodify human lives. The true battle was ongoing, a silent war for the soul of the land. In the ensuing weeks, Crossco Regional crumbled. Its assets were frozen, its board members scrambling to distance themselves from Cross, each one trying to salvage their own reputation from the wreckage. Investigations revealed not just local abuses, but a pattern of systemic corruption that extended far beyond this rural market. A criminal enterprise disguised as corporate efficiency. Daniel Cross himself, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his carefully constructed reputation, was subjected to a thorough and merciless legal process. The federal charges mounted: racketeering, fraud, antitrust violations, a litany of his crimes. His carefully crafted image as a visionary leader evaporated, replaced by the ugly truth of his predatory practices, revealed for all the world to see. His once loyal aides scattered, eager to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency, abandoning their former master to his fate. The financial chains he had forged around others now bound him. The memory of the humiliation, the arrogant dismissal Margaret had endured, occasionally resurfaced. But it was no longer a sting. It was a scar, a reminder of the battle won, a testament to the power of silent observation and the unwavering commitment to justice. She understood that true authority wasn't about loudness or flash, but about the bedrock of truth, the meticulous application of law, and the unwavering conviction in what was right. The market, once a battleground, was slowly transforming into a model of fair trade, sustainable practices, and community empowerment, a living testament to Margaret's intervention. Her action had not just righted a wrong, it had planted a seed of change, nurtured by integrity and respect, allowing new growth to flourish where only barren earth had been. Months later, the dust had truly settled, though the reverberations continued to echo through the corridors of power and across the quiet fields. Daniel Cross, now a gaunt, broken man, stood in a sterile courtroom, his expensive suits replaced by the ill-fitting drabness of a correctional jumpsuit, a stark visual of his fall from grace. The once commanding voice was reduced to a barely audible whisper as the judge read out his sentence: a lengthy prison term, massive fines that stripped him of his remaining wealth, and a lifetime ban from any corporate directorship. The public disgrace was complete, his legacy irrevocably defined by his greed and his spectacular fall. He was defeated, publicly and privately. Margaret Hale was not present in the courtroom. She rarely sought the spotlight, preferring the quiet work of observation and strategic action. Instead, she was visiting another rural community, observing, listening, moving like a ghost in the crowd, ever vigilant. But a subtle, almost imperceptible scene played out in the immaculate, silent offices of AgriCorp Holdings, the very conglomerate Cross had sought to exploit through his regional operations. Cross had held a significant, though minority, stake in several key regional suppliers and distributors that AgriCorp had now been forced to acquire or oversee due to the fallout of his actions. It was a tedious process, untangling his complex financial mess, like excavating a long-buried secret. One afternoon, amidst a pile of legal documents detailing the restructuring of these newly acquired entities, Margaret stumbled upon an old, faded photograph. It was a picture of Daniel Cross, young and impossibly arrogant, his ambition already radiating from him, shaking hands with a much older, stern-faced man whose eyes held a deep, knowing wisdom. The older man was Samuel Hale, Margaret's father, the visionary founder of AgriCorp. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Margaret's lips as she recalled the story, a tale her father had recounted with a mix of amusement and frustration. Years ago, Daniel Cross, then an ambitious junior executive, had tried to strong-arm a small supplier her father was deeply fond of, a legacy farmer just like Tiberius. Samuel Hale, a man known for his quiet integrity and an unshakable moral compass, had publicly rebuked Cross, not just with words, but with a strategic redirection of resources that saved the supplier. He had warned Cross about the dangers of unchecked ambition and disrespect for the foundational elements of the agricultural industry. Cross had smarted from the public dressing down, but outwardly complied, biding his time, waiting for his moment to unleash his true nature. This was before Margaret had fully taken the reins, before her father had retired, his wisdom a constant presence within the company. Now, Margaret found another document, a carefully hidden clause in one of Crossco's earliest corporate charters, a document that had slipped through the hands of countless lawyers, dismissed as archaic or irrelevant. It detailed a complex, almost poetic penalty for certain financial malpractices against AgriCorp's partners, a forced divestment of all cross-correlated shares to be transferred directly to AgriCorp's Rural Community Fund, a fund specifically designed to support vulnerable farmers and rural infrastructure. This clause ensured that any ill-gotten gains derived from exploiting the agricultural community would be reclaimed and reinvested, effectively enriching the very communities he had sought to impoverish. It was a clause her father had insisted upon, a silent guardian against future rogue executives, a testament to his foresight and unwavering commitment to justice. He had called it the tiller's tax, a levy on greed, a tribute to the earth and those who worked it. It was Samuel Hale's ultimate, symmetrical retribution, a legal mechanism ensuring poetic justice beyond the courtroom. Margaret picked up her phone. This time, the call was to Cross's now-disgraced legal team, a final, unyielding blow. "I'm calling about the tiller's tax clause in Crossco's original charter," she stated, her voice calm and authoritative, each word cutting through the static of their defeat. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a flurry of whispered consultations, a sudden, frantic rustling of paper. It was a detail they had missed, buried deep within a mountain of paper, deemed irrelevant until this very moment. "Yes, Chairwoman Hale," a nervous lawyer finally responded, his voice thin with trepidation. We are aware of the clause now. It seems quite ironclad." "Indeed," Margaret replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, a ghost of satisfaction. "I want it executed, every cent, transferred to the AgriCorp Rural Community Fund, effective immediately. There will be no appeals, no delays." She paused, letting the full weight of her words sink in, allowing them to comprehend the finality of it. "And inform Mr. Cross of this development. Tell him it's a posthumous reminder from Samuel Hale, and a very current one from me." The lawyer stammered, then agreed, the sound of his defeat audible even through the phone line. Margaret hung up, the quiet click echoing in the office, a definitive end to a long-fought battle. Daniel Cross, who had sought to destroy the very fabric of the agricultural community for his own gain, would now, ironically, be forced to fund its renewal, to become the unwilling patron of its rebirth. His financial demise wasn't just punishment, it was reclamation, a profound act of restorative justice. His arrogant boast of "these people don't matter" had been answered by the quiet, unyielding power of the very system he had thought to exploit, turned against him by the legacy of integrity. The land and its people had not only survived, they had, through Margaret Hale's silent authority, prevailed. The symmetrical catharsis was complete. His public bow was the recognition of defeat. This hidden financial reversal was the ultimate poetic justice, a silent, powerful testament to the land's enduring strength and the people who honored it, a lesson for any who dared to forget. And so their destiny was forged, a new legacy built from the ashes of the old, a testament to resilience and unwavering principle. Their story now belongs to time, but its power only grows if shared. The greatest strength often lies not in the loudest voice, but in the quietest resolve to uphold justice and respect the unseen foundations of our world. But as one man breaks the system, another is trapped by it, waiting for a savior or for the resolve to become one. In a world increasingly defined by digital currencies and unseen algorithms, where the predators adapt and evolve, how do we protect the vulnerable from the next generation of silent opportunists? If this journey marked your soul, if the fight for justice stirs your spirit, leave a like and subscribe. For the best stories are those that refuse to die in silence, and the most dangerous truths are those yet to be unearthed.